It's the summer of 2025, and the war in Gaza, which began in October 2023, rages on. After 21 months of relentless bombardment, over 50,000 Gazans have been killed. Famine and disease are spreading. More than 60% of homes have been destroyed. Almost the entire population of 2.2 million people has been displaced. In today's episode, we step back to understand the deeper fault lines driving this conflict. How did we get here? Why has peace remained so elusive? And with the current situation more volatile than ever, is a resolution still within reach? My name is Aramis Sinke, here today with Warrior Diplomacy co-host Fabio Almada. Fabio, how are you today?
Hello, Armis. Very well from my side, and really eager to talk about the dynamics behind these ongoing developments in the Middle East. As most of our listeners must be aware, the situation is quite bleak, and the massive attacks these past months Israel has taken have intensified it from Lebanon to Syria, Yemen, to even Iran itself. So I think that we'll definitely have a lot to cover. And really interested as well to talk about these political dynamics, what's behind the drive, because I was reading, Armis, these couple of last days that militarily the campaign has drawn a lot of criticism, that some critics inside Israel's own defense establishment are criticizing its diminishing results. So yeah, I'm really eager to discuss it and the ceasefire negotiations that are ongoing as well in Qatar. But I think that there's so many key sticking points that are unresolved. And I think we have a lot of interesting things to discuss. So yeah, really eager to start, Armis. How about yourself?
Yes, just like you, very eager to talk about this conflict in detail. We haven't done so in the English version so far, but we always felt like if we do this, we really want to do this with an expert who can give us the detailed insight here. And for this reason, we have invited Gerhard Pulfer to the show today. He's been living in the region for more than a decade, working with the United Nations, with the European Union, and the Palestinian National Authority. And Gerhard has reflected on the topic of today's episode in a book which has just been published in May this year. It's titled The Middle East Powder Keg Beyond the Headlines, an Insider's Report. Welcome to Warrior Diplomacy, Gerhard. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Aramis and Fabio.
All right, and with that, we can move on to the first section of this episode today. That's where we will explore the core sources of tension that have time and time again derailed efforts towards a lasting peace between Israel and Palestine.
Well, Armis, to make this episode as comprehensive as possible, as you've mentioned, I think it's super important to explain before we go ahead with what's going on today, just these key aspects of the roots of the confrontation and start realizing why it's so hard to settle this everlasting conflict. So just going back to 1948, the State of Israel was established in the wake of the Holocaust on the land that has been part of the British mandatory Palestine. And for Jewish communities around the world, it was a moment of survival and self-determination. But at the same time, for many Arabs, it marked the Nakba, which means the catastrophe, as hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced. And this is really important because the scars of this moment, continue to shape politics and the perceptions of what's happening today. Of course, that the international community broadly supports a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine exist side by side. But in both societies, there's powerful forces that reject this outcome. And with the ongoing developments and the conflict, the war we've seen in the past couple of years, this might be even further from reality than we'd like for it to be. Fast forward to the latest stage of the conflict that began a couple of years ago. The war in Gaza today is been dragged in for months. And despite the mounting pressure both within Israel and from the international community for it to stop, the military campaign continues. And there's a lot of criticism. Militarily, many argue that the conflict is reaching a dead end, that Hamas is severely weakened, and even senior Israeli commanders have suggested that maybe the focus should shift elsewhere, maybe for other threats like Iran. But in the ground, the Israeli soldiers they're still blowing up buildings that are already destroyed. No clear objective, and there's even a lot of criticism of famine spreading in the whole Gaza Strip. So if the war makes little strategic sense and this humanitarian toll is more and more catastrophic, why is this keep going? And I think that the answer partly lies in Israeli domestic politics and the dynamics within the Netanyahu coalition. So I think that the first question, Gerhard, that I like to ask you is, how divided is the country between the military, the public, the government, and how much influence do you think that Netanyahu's coalition still has on the direction of the country and the conflict?
Yeah, I think this is really a very important question. And actually, I mean, when looking at Israeli internal politics, it's much less divided than many people believe. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So if you look at Israel today, it is very, very different from the Israel of the 80s and the 90s. First and foremost, because of demographic shifts. So if you look at the number of ultra-Orthodox in Israel, it stood at, in 2009, it stood at 750,000. And that number doubled between 2009 and 2024. So now there are approximately 1.4 million ultra-Orthodox in the country. And this demographic group will account for roughly half of the population by mid of the century. So there is a huge demographic shift in Israel. And this has implications on how people perceive the Palestinian questions, but also how they perceive internal questions. I tell you just a recent poll that has been published. It's from the Geocartography Knowledge Group, was done in May, and it was commissioned by Pennsylvania State University. And according to this poll, 82% of Jewish Israelis support the expulsion of Gazans. And this number stands almost at 100% among the ultra-Orthodox, to be precise at 97%. And 56% support the expulsion of Jewish Israelis, support the expulsion of Palestinian citizens of Israel. Again, that number is roughly 90% for ultra-Orthodox. And 47 also agree that the question that all inhabitants should be killed when there is, agree to the question that all inhabitants should be killed when the Israeli army conquers a city. So there is much less dissonance than we think, because there is also more homogeneity within society, because there are some segments that are quite homogeneous among Israeli society have more and more influence and are gaining more and more demographic stand. There's currently also no Jewish party in the Knesset that supports the establishment of a Palestinian state anymore. It's only the Arab parties that still support the establishment of a Palestinian state. So, and if you look at the protests, I mean, we read in the news, we see the pictures about protests in Israel, but it's important, and I admire these people when they come out on the streets. But when you look at things, I mean, it's a few thousand people who show up for these protests within a country of millions. So it's not a very strong show. And what has once been considered extreme fringe has become now the mainstream. And we also have to consider that the far-right flank, they are the first to publicly announce policy goals that were once considered taboo, but they are more like the trial balloon. The ideology of the messianic parties and of the Likud, it largely converges, and when it comes to the Palestinian question. So the differences within the right are not that huge when it comes to Palestinian questions. And also within Israeli society, there is quite a consensus on this war, and that it's important to continue the war, and that the goal should be the expulsion of the Palestinians. So there isn't much dissonance in Israeli society, I'm afraid.
The expulsion of Palestinians, that means effectively forcing people off their homes. This is an extreme approach. For what reasons are people in Israel favoring this over a two-state solution?
It depends on which segment of society, Israeli society, you look into. If it's more secular people who don't identify necessarily with the national religious parties, they put up first and foremost the security argument. But we have to consider that roughly 1/4 of the population identifies as national religious. And this is not a rational thinking anymore. So this is about, preparing the ground for the coming of the Messiah, for the building of the third temple, for the redemption of the people, and for the redemption of mankind. So you can't compare this with rational politics necessarily. This is not about economic well-being or security. It's fulfilling a biblical prophecy, and this is what roughly 1/4 of the voters identify with. And then you have an even larger segment that identifies as ultra-Orthodox. So there is quite the goal for many of these is to conquer the entire land. They see the atrocities and the massacres that happened on 7th of August, 7th of October 23. They see it now as an opportunity to get rid and to finalize and to terminate the Palestinian question. And it's not only in Gaza. So there are serious attempts, and I mean, people are not making even a secret out of it. It's publicly announced. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, has stated it publicly. The finance minister, Smotrich, has stated it publicly. Even Netanyahu has stated it publicly. The aim is to get the Gazans out of Gaza and to conquer the land. And this, from their perspective, this war will only finalize once that policy goal is achieved. And it's not only happening in the Gaza Strip, but it's also happening in the West Bank. There is massive scale displacement of Palestinians. We're talking about of tens of thousands who have been displaced already. There we have pogrom-like events where settlers come into Palestinian villages and randomly shoot and torch buildings and cars and even kill people. And there's no, the villagers are helpless, and the soldiers are aiding in this endeavor, and police isn't doing anything about it. So this is really seen by many as an opportunity to finish off the Palestinian question and to have full control over the entirety of the land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, and for some even beyond the land or between the Mediterranean and the Jordan. There are fringe groups who are talking about settling and conquering Lebanon up to the Litani River in the north. There are others who speak about taking the Golan Heights up until almost to the gates of Damascus. There are conferences about the eastern side of the Jordan River, what is today Jordan. So it's really terrible, the thinking and the ideology that spreads. And in Germany we have this saying that the appetite comes as you eat, and when you feel that you can get everything and there are no boundaries, that might it might lure politicians into setting goals that have once been considered totally unacceptable and taboo, and that are now being pursued in reality, first and foremost in West Bank, in Gaza, and in East Jerusalem, but potentially also beyond.
Definitely. I think that from the government, and particularly from Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners, just as you've said, Gerhard, the policy now, it seems that most of them are ideologically committed to this idea of a permanent Israeli control over Gaza. And as you've said, even with the forced removal of Palestinians, and as you've said, I don't think this is fringe views anymore. This is what's driving the policy. And we need to remember as well that Netanyahu's political survival depends on keeping this coalition together. So he has every incentive to prolong the war, or even talk about other threats like the one we've seen in Syria, like the one we've seen in Iran.
This is a bit of a misperception that is often repeated. I'm not totally sure whether this is the case, because he got assurances from other parties that they would support him, and that if those fringe parties, or I wouldn't call it fringe parties anymore, but if Otzma Yehudit, Jewish Power, and the National Religious Party or others, if they bail out of the coalition, that others would come in and support Netanyahu and keep him in position as prime minister. So his keeping this coalition is only partially a thing out of necessity, but it's also, first and foremost, I believe, it's a matter of choice. This is the coalition that he wishes to have. He was, before the last elections, he did everything to unite these extreme right-wing parties under one slot so they could pass the threshold to the Knesset. So this is the government of his dreams, basically. It's the coalition that he was hoping for, and it's because Netanyahu is ideologically committed. It's not only to avoid a corruption process. I think this is more a side effect, but I think it's the other way around. Netanyahu has been ideologically committed to the greater land of Israel since early on. He was the one who led the demonstrations against the Oslo Accords and against Rabin in the mid-90s already. He was the one who voted against the Gaza withdrawal, even against his own prime minister Sharon, and brought about the exit of Sharon from the Likud party so that he could take over the party with a much more ideological and extremist view. So and he has consistently tried to torpedo all peace initiatives for decades. So I think there is more to it than just avoiding a corruption trail. This is really his ideology.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is exactly why we need experts to clarify these type of internal developments. And what you mentioned, it's true. Netanyahu has been in this side of the story since forever. And the more support he gets, not just internally but externally as well from the Trump administration. I mean, this seems like it might not change in the coming years.
Let's move on to the Palestinian side. Not only in Israel, but also among Palestinians, support for the two-state solution is in decline. Gerhard, can you introduce us to the political ideologies of Palestine in more detail?
That's that's quite a question, I have to say. Where to start with? I mean, basically, you have two large blocks currently. When you look at Palestinian politics, you have two large parties with their allies. And these are Fatah on the one hand. Fatah is more or less synonymous with the Palestinian Authority and with the Palestinian Liberation Organization. It has been ruling West Bank and Gaza when the Oslo Accords were signed, and it was able to take control of parts of West Bank and Gaza, 18% of the West Bank and all of Gaza. Gaza is only 360 square kilometers, so it's not a huge territory. And Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, they have been committed, seriously committed to a two-state solution, and the establishment of the Palestinian National Authority was meant to last for a 5-year period until the signing of a final status agreement. And that period has elapsed basically in 1999, 2000, and we are 25 years. over beyond signing this final status. solution, but the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, they have really consistently been committed to the two-state solution and to negotiations. On the other hand, there you have Hamas. Hamas is an offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood that was established in Egypt in the 1920s and 30s under Hassan al-Banna. And it's nationalistic, also nationalistic, pan-Arabistic movement, and it's because it has this Islamic calling. It has a very strong position on any compromise with Israel or recognition of Israel. So for Hamas, it would be blasphemy, basically, or heresy, to give up on land that, according to Hamas, has been promised by God to the Palestinian or to the Islamic Ummah, to the religious people, to the religious society, the Islamic religious society. And therefore, for Hamas, I think it looked like there would be some pragmatism in Hamas. They have indicated at times that there can't be a peace agreement, but there can be a long-term truce. There can be a truce of 99 years, and this can be prolonged again and again. But when we look at the reality, I mean, what has happened on 7th of October 23, this put all the previous statements very much in question about the ability of Hamas to be pragmatic in any sense. So, and this Hamas is also trying to undermine the Palestinian National Authority and Fatah and the control of Fatah and Hamas, of Fatah in West Bank and Gaza Strip. It has launched attacks on Israel with homemade rockets in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And then it has progressed to more elaborate versions of these rockets, more sophisticated versions, but always also with the intention of harming the Palestinian Authority, because the Israelis would then not only retaliate against Hamas, but they would also retaliate against the Palestinian Authority, because they wanted the Palestinian Authority to put more pressure on Hamas. And at the same time, this would destroy and weaken the Palestinian Authority. So the goal, the struggle of Hamas has consistently been one not only against Israel with attacks inside Israel, but it has also been one against the Palestinian Authority. And it culminated with a takeover of the Gaza Strip in 2007, when Hamas basically expelled Fatah and the Palestinian National Authority from the Gaza Strip after a civil war-like situation that had already been dragging on for months and culminated in terrible events in June 2007. So for this reason, there is a very deep foe between Fatah and Hamas, and many in Fatah, they see Israel as a lesser evil compared to Hamas. So for them, Hamas might be considered as a bigger threat to their personal security and their lives and their family lives than whatever Israel does. So this also needs to be taken into consideration.
We know from the latest opinion polls before the large-scale attacks on the Gaza Strip by Israel that support for Hamas, public support, stood at around 40%. Now, with Hamas severely weakened by the Israeli military, do you see any potential for an alternative political movement emerging?
Polls, you have to consider that they also mirror the state of the so-called peace process, so of the negotiations and the political process between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So in the 90s, when the negotiations were going well, whenever negotiations seemed to go well, Hamas, the support for Hamas in the polls decreased significantly. And it climbed again when people were frustrated because of the lack of progress on the peace process, but also frustrated about events within the Palestinian Authority, the corruption, etc., or because there are no negotiations. So the opinion polls are an indicator of these political developments. They don't necessarily only reflect an ideological commitment to Hamas, towards Hamas. There's, of course, a hardcore support for Hamas that's also considerable, but there are many people who just support Hamas because they might believe it's a better alternative than what Fatah is trying and what has been futile over the past decades because they haven't reached anything by negotiations. As for the questions about alternative political movements in Gaza, well, it's totally impossible to tell in this situation. As long as there is no ceasefire, as long as no political life can take place, as long as there can be no open discourse about the future of the Gaza Strip and its population, it's impossible for any parties or movements to emerge and to be successful. My personal fear and what I think is a real risk is that what people are experiencing and have been experiencing over the past 2 years in Gaza, especially the children and the youth, this has caused trauma throughout the entire population. And these trauma might also influence political considerations and political beliefs for decades. So this might, that the hate and the frustration and the losses this war is still creating and nurturing on a day-to-day basis, I don't think it will de-radicalize people. But it needs stability. It needs a governance form so that there can be discussions on how the future of the Gaza Strip can look like. The worst thing to come about is what's currently also being supported by Israel to basically provide assistance to some elements, to some clans in fighting Hamas. And this is really a recipe for disaster. It's something that can aid Israel in the short term, but it will likely backfire over the midterm and the long term because you create a total vacuum. And during the second Intifada, you had this situation where there was a total vacuum in power. Clans were fighting each other. Clans were fighting also, or groups within clans or within parties were not only fighting each other, but then also fighting against Israel. And you give each cell of 4 or 5 people basically the power to bring about a major Israeli retaliatory attack by firing a rocket at Israel. So, and again, in the vacuum, you have the strongest party that it's like anarchy. I remember it because I was living there in Gaza during the second Intifada, and it was like a total anarchy. And it meant only that the stronger parties would have the upper hand, the stronger clans, the stronger families, the stronger parties. And it didn't go down well for Israel because it just radicalized. More radical groups came up, groups that were affiliated with Al-Qaeda, well, later on with Islamic State. You had more attacks on Israel. You had a total lack of coordination. No one was able to suppress them. And I think such a power vacuum and such anarchy would be the worst thing for the population in Gaza, but I also don't think it would bring security to Israel.
I'm very tempted to now ask you about potential ways to better resolve this, but we will get to this in the third section of the episode. But before we do that, it's also important to talk about the broader geopolitical dynamics, and that's what we will do in section 2. So Gaza is only one battleground in a much wider struggle. There's three powerful actors guiding the geopolitics of the Middle East. That's Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Iran. Iran represents the Shia sect of Islam. It supports armed groups across the region that either support Shiism, like the Houthis in Yemen, or oppose Israel, like Hamas in Gaza. Israel says Iran destabilizes the region by supporting these groups. With the support of the US and other allies, it managed to heavily weaken them in past months. And meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has also been engaging in proxy wars against Iran, which it also sees as the biggest threat to the region. Like in much of the Arab world, the Saudi Arabian population is opposed to Israeli statehood. But the Saudi leadership has increasingly been cooperating with Israel in recent years, and other Gulf states have even cooperated more closely with Israel, signing the Abraham Accords next to a few North African countries.
Yeah, indeed, Armis. I think that the global scale and international actors involved is crucial. I mean, we need to talk about the role of the United States in this conflict, which is still to today Israel's primary backer. Of course, with a maybe fading global influence, there's other relevant actors as well, maybe not as present as the States, but Russia, China are trying to step in those international efforts, supporting Iran, cultivating ties across the Middle East, and at the same time, the European Union as well, increasingly divided over how to respond to the actions of Israel in Gaza. So, Gerhard, I would like to ask you, as you've had a lot of experience there in the region, how do you think that the current Trump administration's strategy differ from anything that the American perspective was trying to develop in the region?
It differs immensely. I mean, it's like day and night. There have been serious attempts by U.S. administrations, by successive U.S. administrations, to broker an accord. And the paradigm for brokering an accord has been the establishment of a Palestinian state. With Trump, the Palestinian state is no longer on the agenda. I mean, it's not there is not even any more rhetoric about the two-state solution. So it's basically a full recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the entirety of Greater Israel, meaning Israel with East Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza Strip, and then the Golan Heights. So basically all the territories that were occupied after the Six-Day War in June 1967. And that's a huge shift, a huge political shift. And that is really unprecedented. Also under Bush Jr., there has been de facto movement, or the commitment towards a two-state solution has been less pronounced, and the Bush administration, the second one, and one the junior, has been very outspoken about its support to Israel, to Israel and to Netanyahu. But it has at least upheld this rhetoric about the two-state solution. And now we don't even see the rhetoric about the two-state solution anymore. On the contrary, I mean, you have a president, the US president, basically calling for the expulsion and for ethnic cleansing in Gaza. This is like the wet dream of the extreme right-wing parties in Israel. They were reluctant to announce this publicly in Israeli media. And then you have the US president calling for such a move. I mean, it's like all dreams come true for Netanyahu and all his political allies. So that's an unprecedented shift, and because it's no longer related to anything that's prescribed by international law.
And then we also have Europe as another potential player, one has to say, because Europe has not taken a unified position on the conflict, which then makes it harder for Europe to influence the conflict itself. But Gerhard, what could be Europe's role?
Yeah, I mean, Europe has been active in the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations in the Oslo process. It has been a member of the Middle East Quartet for many years that existed for more than a decade. It comprised U.S., EU, yeah, Russia, and the UN, and they were trying to align their policies around the Middle East conflict, basically. But Europe has never been a strong player on the political front. They've always been a strong player on the economic front in terms of trade agreements, in terms of aid, donor aid to the Palestinian population, to the Palestinian National Authority. EU is the strongest donor currently to the Palestinian National Authority, and without European support, the Palestinian National Authority would totally collapse. And but it's not converting this economic cloud into a political cloud. And you said it already. There's this lack of unity. Let's also look with whom we are dealing on the Israeli side when it comes to Europe. So Netanyahu's Likud party is officially an ally of the European faction Patriots for Europe. And that is the faction with Austrian Freedom Party, with Le Pen's Rassemblement, with Orban, with Salvini. So these right-wing parties of Europe, they are staunch supporters of Israel. So, and Orban has been vetoing sanctions against extremist settlers in the West Bank. So and then you have states like Austria and Germany, who don't know how to interpret what it means to draw lessons from the Shoah. So, they have very strong difficulties in defining their policies in light of the current situation in the Gaza war. And then you have other states like Spain who are more progressive, Ireland and Belgium. And now we have this call or this initiative from Macron, which is not totally new, but now it seems like a firm commitment to recognize the Palestinian state in September at the General Assembly, UN General Assembly. It's a very strong symbolic step, but it's mainly a symbolic step. And what is missing is tangible steps. I think we should give more attention to tangible steps. And there's the association agreement between Israel and the EU, which has a human rights clause. And I mean, when do you activate this clause if not in the current situation, when you have a prime minister who is indicted at The Hague for crimes against humanity and war crimes? So, what is the meaning of this human rights clause? Wouldn't it make sense to suspend this association agreement at least until Israel, agrees to open the sanctions and to open the siege on Gaza and to let in to allow for the access of humanitarian goods and to stop the ethnic cleansing as well in the West Bank. So I mean there is no agreement. There can be no agreement in Europe, or there on really tangible things, because there is this division among the three blocs. And these blocs are the right-wing parties who are associated with Netanyahu because they are in the same political ideology and the same political bloc, the Patriots for Europe, which Likud is aligned with and associated with. Officially, you just need to look at the website of this Patriots for Europe, and you see Likud's name there. And then there is Austria and Germany because of their history. And then you have other countries who have a very different approach to the to this conflict, but to find a common consensus that would really go beyond symbolic measures, I think this is something I'm afraid will not come about in the near future.
I agree. I think that you hit the nail. I mean, it's not that Europe doesn't have the tools. They do. You've mentioned this trade EU-Israel Association Agreement, no formal suspension, no sanctions, no trade conditionality. So yeah, I mean, it might be as well to put it out there that there might be also a fear of a backlash. European leaders may be worried that taking a tougher stance could strain transatlantic relations even more, as it's not in its best of times. And with the war in Ukraine and American support there, that might also be a reason why maybe the EU is not taking such a tougher stance. But talking about Russia and China, I know that they might not be so deeply invested in this conflict per se. But of course, there is global interest in the region. Talking about Russia first, I mean, Moscow has long tried to portray itself as this alternative to U.S. Hegemony in the Middle East. And China is also trying to present itself as a neutral peacemaker in the region. We need to remember that they brokered an entente between Iran and Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago. But in this case, maybe they're keeping a lower profile. However, Gerhard, I'd like to ask you about the role of Arab states. We're talking about Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. They have great stakes.
That's complicated because I think you have, on the one hand, I mean, if you look at Jordan, for example, more than half of its population, we have Palestinian ancestors. So most of the Jordanians are former or are refugees from Palestine, and they also have citizenship, Jordanian citizenships, and many of them identify, especially younger generation, they identify more with Jordan than they do with Palestine. Jordan has been preparing for such situations, I would say. It has launched a policy of Jordan first. So this Jordan first policy is not something very new. It has also been promoted for many years because they don't want to be drawn into Israeli-Palestinian warfare. And they have been a battleground of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the 70s when the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was operating out of Jordan and had its bases in Jordan and was attacking Israel from Jordan territory. And it almost brought about the downfall of the Hashemite dynasty. And they certainly don't want to take such a risk again. So there is solidarity with Palestine. There is solidarity with the Palestinians to a certain degree, but they will not jeopardize the rule of the Hashemite dynasty, and they will not jeopardize the stability of the kingdom for the sake of the Palestinians. It's also interesting that we haven't seen, of course, there's political oppression and repression, but we haven't seen huge outpours of demonstrations in Jordan. There have been events, but it's not that there has been an upheaval against the policy of the Jordanian government in support of Gaza. So people know they are aware they have something to lose. They are one of the few more or less stable countries in a very in a very fragile region. So they don't want to jeopardize their situation as well. And for Egypt, Egypt is also a foe of Hamas. So you have to remember who Abdel Fattah Sisi is. Sisi, he came to power by overthrowing Morsi, the former elected president from the Muslim Brotherhood, and he has put Morsi in jail. And Morsi has the former president of the Brotherhood. He died in jail in the meantime, and so the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an offshoot, it is a forbidden movement. It's a forbidden political movement in the terrorist organization in Egypt. So they have no interest in doing anything that could support or stabilize Hamas or help Hamas to be viewed as something positive and as being viewed as successful. They know that their job is to broker and to help in brokering ceasefires. They have done so in the past. They know Hamas better than the Qataris, probably because they have been more intimately involved in negotiations between Israelis and Hamas in the past, for the past ceasefires. But they have no interest in supporting Hamas in any way. And also for the Egyptian population, while many of them feel with the plight of the Gazans, they also don't want to jeopardize what they have, and they don't want to jeopardize the stability of their country. So I think the interest for stability and not to engage and not to bring the country into turmoil, I think that is still above everything else for both countries.
What about Saudi Arabia?
There is a common foe. The common foe between Israel and the Saudis is Iran, and this foe makes up for a strong axis, and they have common interests, the Saudis and the Israelis, and they already have a strong partnership. Whether this is above the surface or below the surface, I think it's of secondary concern now, both to the Americans, to the Israelis, and to the Saudis, because in reality, Saudi Arabia is already strongly aligned on many issues with Israeli policies. And whether it's official recognition or not, the Israelis will not challenge their ideology and challenge their core interests in order to get official recognition by Saudi Arabia. I think this is out of question.
You highlighted how these countries take self-interest, in this case, over potential help for Palestine. But how far would this go? For example, if there was an ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip.
They would not accept it, but how far would they go by not accepting it? I think that's the question. If there is an ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip, I think the question would be where to. If it's towards Egypt, it would create, I think, a very serious situation, because the Egyptians will not accept 2.2 million Palestinians, because they have seen what this means, what taking the conflict to a neighboring country means for that country, and what kind of destabilizing effect this can have. They have seen it in Jordan, they have seen it in Lebanon 10 years later. So if this expulsion is towards Sinai, is towards Egypt, I think it would create serious differences between Egypt and Israel, and it might draw out the Arab League and other Arab nations into such a standoff. But what it would mean concretely and what would happen as a result, I think it's unpredictable at this point of time.
Are there any other visions in Israel on where the people in the Gaza Strip would go, aside from the Sinai Peninsula?
Yeah, I think there are different. There are certainly lots of visions, but what's realistic is another question. I mean, I heard in the media that they have been exploring plans for Somalia and Somaliland and Sudan, but these countries also naturally rejected this idea up front. So there are all kinds of visions where they are also trying to arm wrestle and get Europeans and Canadians to accept Palestinians. But of course, no one wants to be a party in promoting an ethnic cleansing at this table.
Wow, it's incredible to hear this sort of conversation today, Gerhard, really. And I think this is a really nice blog. I think that the regional situation, the way that it unfolds, and the global element of it is really interesting as well. And of course, everything that we discussed in the first blog. For any listener that maybe would like to have a bit more of information on this rivalry between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and those regional geopolitics, we also have an episode on it. So we will also add it to the description of the episode. But Aramis, we heard, I think it's time to jump back again to the topic of this any potential resolution, any avenue for peace that we might think of in the last block of today. So with the Gaza war deepening, as we've said, and these internal fractures on all sides, there's more and more calls to revive the two-state solution. However, as we have discussed recently, it seems like it's really far from reality. Trust is shattered, and the facts on the ground are changing really fast. So not so sure if that's feasible anymore.
Yeah, I think talking about the two-state solution in 2025 is really anachronistic. It has been already anachronistic, I would say, 10 years ago, before the war in Gaza. And if you look today at the West Bank and East Jerusalem, so the occupied territories of 67, there are roughly 750,000 Israeli settlers living in these territories. And it's not these settlers, they are a major political force now. They are controlling the state now. The public security minister is a deeply committed settler who had joined, who was part of a party that was considered a terrorist organization, even inside Israel and in Europe and in the United States, the Kach Kahane movement. Then you have Smotrich, who is also a ideological settler, and he's the finance minister, and he's responsible for security in the West Bank, and he controls the armed forces in the West Bank, basically. So and other ministers are also settlers, deep ideological settlers. So it's not like these are part of the government. No, they control the government. And to get the settlers out of the West Bank, 750, it's something that is totally unrealistic. Politically, it's not I don't see a pathway in getting this done politically. No one in Israel would be able to get this done. So would it be possible still to build a state, a Palestinian state, around these settlements any longer in 2025? No, I don't think so. It's they have done the job in totally fragmenting the West Bank with the settlements. It's not only the settlements that you see, it's also the master plans around them. Sometimes the master plans are 10 times as large as what the built-up area is. And these master plans, they divide the West Bank more or less by three. There's a northern part that's interrupted by a settlement block. Then there's a middle part, and then a southern West Bank. And there are many dots and lines of settlements in between. Then there's the separation wall that's also taking off Palestinian land and that de facto annexing it to Israel. So what is left? What kind of Palestinian state could we talk of? The Palestinian Authority, they control 18% of the West Bank directly. That is as much as Israel has declared as military firing zones in the West Bank. So the areas they declared as military firing zones in the West Bank is just as big as the territory that the Palestinian National Authority is controlling. If it would be a Palestinian state, it would be a state that has no real territory, that has no real territorial continuity, that is not economically viable, and where you cannot really talk about sovereignty. And therefore, I think talking about two-state solution doesn't make lots of sense anymore. We need to go past the two-state paradigm and consider a solution that guarantees the right and the citizenship for all people living between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River in a different way.
I was reading, Gerhard, a couple of days ago about this other concept called the one-state reality, which refers to the fact that even there's a commitment of two states, the actual Israeli control over the West Bank and Gaza expands to the point where effectively there's just a single political space under Israeli sovereignty and influence. And it could be a way, but again, many fear that incorporating millions of Palestinians into this Jewish state, it would mean that these people will be technically under domination instead of actually integration. And of course, that for the Palestinians, this one-state reality would mean having limited rights, restricted movement, and fragmented communities. So it could be even worse. But as you've said, a Gaza under shambles and a fractured West Bank. What else there is for these people? It's true that this is the moral argument. There definitely should be two states, but there is no state. Israel has made sure for it not to be anything left after the war. So it's a dilemma that we'll stay in. And sadly, I don't have the answers.
Yeah, look, I mean, that was the rationale for negotiating the Oslo Accords. The labor Zionist parties and their allies, they were dealing with this dilemma that if you want a Jewish and a democratic state, you need to separate from the Palestinians. You need to establish some kind of mechanism where Palestinians are self-governed or have limited sovereignty or whatever, call it a state or whatever. And that was the reason for this separation and for establishing the Palestinian National Authority, and eventually even for negotiations about some kind of statehood. With Likud, we moved away from that paradigm. The ideology of Likud can do without uh, the state that is democratic in these terms. So the priority is on the Jewish element. It doesn't necessarily need to be democratic, certainly not for the Palestinians. So then it means that you have one part of the population ruling over another part of the population. By now, almost we can say that it's a minority ruling over a majority. If you take the Jewish and the Palestinian population between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. What does that mean? How do you call this ruling over another population by another legal system where people don't have rights? That is commonly referred to as apartheid. And Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have both termed the Israeli occupation of West Bank and Gaza as apartheid over for the past couple of years. I think for the past 3-4 years, they have both come to the conclusion that this kind of regime passes a threshold of apartheid. Apartheid is a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. And then what we see now, I think, is taking it even a step further. So you don't want a huge Palestinian population. You don't want to rule over this huge Palestinian population. You go one step further and you expel all or large parts of that population. So you don't have the dilemma of ruling over a large population. And that's considered a solution for under the current paradigm now. And I personally don't think it will bring security to Israel, just as past steps and past politics have not brought more security, but on the contrary, But that is the paradigm that is currently being explored and is being executed.
Gerhard, now we spent a fair amount of time discussing the different visions and how each vision excludes the other from being realized. We have on one hand the Israeli people wanting something that the Palestinians cannot live with, and the other way around. Now, as a concluding remark to close this episode, I'm curious about your vision. What could be politically, diplomatically, emotionally an approach?
There have been many very promising initiatives at the micro scale. And I have been exposed to some of these initiatives where Israelis and Palestinians work together on equal footing and on a rights-based approach, and recognizing each other's legitimate rights and also recognizing the violations of these rights, particularly through the occupation. But these initiatives have always been targeted by the government. So there have been very explicit attempts to tarnish them, or to outlaw them, or to cut their financial resources. So it's not something that has been able to make it to the mainstream. And on a larger scale, I think the parties cannot get out of this conflict, and especially on the Israeli side, the incentives to allow for a Palestinian state or for full rights of Palestinians are very limited. There are no incentives to do that. Israel is the dominant power; they control the shots, and they of course they want security, they want peace, but under what under what parameters and under what preconditions? Um, the we need to refer back to international law. We need to refer back to international rights, and I think this needs to be the red thread for all the conversations. We cannot refer to messianic promises, or uh, to Quran passages as the red thread for talks between the parties. The only solid basis, and the only common basis that can be established on a regional basis is international law, is international rights, and international humanitarian law. And I think this needs to be the baseline for all conversations, and it needs international intervention. And the only party that is currently able to deliver such a discourse based on a rights-based discourse, I think, in my view, is the Europeans, because the Americans under Trump, they are not able to deliver on this.
Thank you, Gerhard. This has been an extremely insightful conversation. I learned a lot. And also many thanks for our listeners for tuning in.